welcome back to another edition of Crafting and Crime Daily, the show where I recap live trials. However, there's no live trial right now going on. So today I've got a truly remarkable true crime story. You are not going to believe what happened in this story today. So stay tuned. But first, it's Friday, and on Friday, we dance. Friday dance. Some of you get paid today. Some of you don't, because I'm retired. All right. Today I'm going to talk about the Chowchilla kidnapping. Yes, Chowchilla is a farm town about 100 miles away from San Francisco. And in 1976, the unthinkable happened in this town. I'm going to start this story by talking about the perpetrators. Fred Woods, James Schoenfeld, and his younger brother, Richard Schoenfeld. These three men grew up in a life of privilege. All three rich. James and Richard Schoenfeld grew up, their father was a very well-to-do doctor, very successful doctor, new money, not old money, but new money. But nonetheless, they didn't want for anything except that as they became adults, their father cut them off and they needed money. Now, Fred Woods, very rich. He had a multi-million-dollar trust fund. His family had old money. His father, even though he was rich with old money, had a very successful business. He had a quarry. He had other businesses, very successful businessman. But Fred Woods grew up in a life that was very, very lonely. His parents, although they had all of this money, would spend it all on themselves. They would travel all over the world. There's pictures all over their house where it's just father and mother. He would stay home with the babysitter, the nanny. So he grew up very lonely. He even had a sister that had Down syndrome that was sent away. So he didn't grow up with her either. We don't know what happened to her. But in any case, Fred was not going to come into this trust fund until he was much older. So he didn't have access to the multi-million dollars. And like I said, though, he didn't want for anything. He got married. His father would give him a monthly check. He took that check and he didn't work. He just lived off the check, him and his wife, but he would spend most of it on himself. Yep. So eventually his wife got tired of this. She got onto him and she's like, nah, and they got divorced within a year. So Fred, once again, he meets up with these James and Richard somehow. I don't know how they met as friends, but they met, they became friends, and they all three were like, their fathers had cut them off. They didn't have any money. They decide, we need money. How are we going to get it? So they start stealing cars. So they thought they're stealing cars. They're making money. They're thinking this is a great gig, except they get caught. They weren't that good at it. So they figure out we've got to come up with some other way that we can make some big money. So they decide that they are going to kidnap a busload full of children. And because it would be more than one child, it would be multiple children, they could ask for multiple millions of dollars. And the children, because they're children, would be easy to control. So they begin to plan this kidnap of these school bus full of children. So meanwhile, in Chowchilla, it's a, hot summer, July 15th, 1976. It's like the day before the end of summer camp. These kids would go to summer camp at the Dairyland Elementary School. They were ages 5 to 14. They would go to school like half a day, and then the other half of the day they had outings that they would do. And this particular day, they had been driven to the local pool. So now they're getting on the bus in the afternoon. It's like 4:00, and they're all wet and happy, and they've been playing in the pool. They've had a great day. It's summertime. It's probably quite loud on that bus. The bus driver was a man named Frank Edward Ray. Now, Ed Ray, he had even driven some of their parents when they were little on this bus. This is a small town, but Edward was the bus driver. Everybody knew Ed Ray, trusted Ed Ray, so he drives them home. Now, after he's dropped off a lot of the kids, he's got 26 kids left on the bus. He's, dropping them off one by one at their homes, and he sees a van parked in the middle of the road. So he's thinking to himself, well, maybe the van's broke down, maybe they need help. So he stops the bus. So 3 men get out of this van wearing pantyhose over their head, so to store their features. They have pistols and a sawed-off shotgun. And they approach the school bus, and they tell Ed, do not back up or I'll shoot you. Don't put it in reverse or we will shoot you. And then they demanded that he open the bus door. So he opens the bus door. One of them, holding a gun to Ed, forces him out of his seat. The second man gets into the driver's seat, and the third man goes back and gets in the van. And they proceed to start driving. Now, they don't drive for a very, very long time because now they have kidnapped 26 children and a bus driver. And a bus is easy to spot. It's a big yellow bus. Now, Ed is trying to keep the kids calm on this bus. He's like, hey, kids, just, stay in your seat, keep quiet, everything's going to be okay. So they actually force Ed towards the back of the bus. And as he's passing the kids, he's reassuring them, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, we're going to be all right. He gets into the back of the bus. So they drive. They don't drive that far before they find a spot. They drive the bus onto this dried up riverbed that's got these really tall bamboo, what do you call it? Bamboo shoots? Bamboo. Tall enough to hide this bus. You're not going to see it from the road. So what they do is, and they've planned this ahead of time, they have a second van parked in this location. This was all something that they had planned out. It took Fred, James, and Richard about 1.5 years to carefully plan this thing out. So they have this van sitting there waiting. So now they've got 2 vans. They have converted these vans into basically prisons. They have painted the windows black. They have blocked the doors and divided the front of the van from the back of the van with plywood. So it's basically a box that these children were asked to get into. And what they do is they take the first van and they pull it up close to the door of the bus that's in this riverbed, and they tell the children one by one, get into the van, but do not touch the ground. If you touch the ground, you're going to be in trouble. They didn't want to leave any footprints. So they have the children get into the vans. So they have 13 kids in one van, 13 kids and Ed in the other van. So they load up these vans. Both of them have been converted, and they start driving. Those kids were in the back of those vans for 10 to 12 hours. 10 to 12 hours. In this sweltering summer heat. I don't know where you guys live that you're listening to this, but in July in California, it is sweltering even after the sun goes down. There's no ventilation in the back of these vans. They're not getting any air. Some of the kids are getting sick, they're vomiting, and Ed is trying to tell, he was only in one of the vans, but he's trying to tell the kids that he's in the van with, to vomit in the middle of the van because they're sitting around the edges, and that way they wouldn't have to sit in it. These poor kids. Now, they finally stopped. They actually did stop the vans at one point to refuel, but they did not let any of the children or Ed out of the vans. They continue driving, and it's hours and hours that they're in the back of these vans. The vans stop, they get out, and they see that they're in this location where there's just this trap door with a ladder that's going down. Now, they don't see this, but what happens is one by one, the children are taken out of the van. Ed's taken out first. He is taken out of the van first. And these poor kids, they don't know what's happening to the kids that are already being taken out of the van. Are they being killed one by one? They don't know what's happening. They're scared to death. So they take Ed first. They get his full name, his age, his phone number. They make him take off his pants and his shoes, and then they make him go down the ladder into this hole. Now, what these men had done was they had dug out this 12-foot hole and put in this van. The van was 8 foot by 16 foot. It was like a moving van. And they backed up this van into the hole. Now, they had put into this van flashlights, jugs of water, peanut butter, bread, not enough for 26 people, 27 people, but some peanut butter and bread, mattresses, a ventilator fan, and then this makeshift door, this trap door that would get them in and out, or get them in. They weren't supposed to get out. Horrible, horrible conditions. They had actually, over the wheel well of this moving van, they had converted the wheel wells into toilets so that the kids would have some place to go to the bathroom. So back to the kids. One by one, they're having these kids, they're taking the kids out of the van one at a time. One guy would say, "What is your name? Give us your full name. Give us your phone number. Give us your address." The other guy would make them take off a piece of clothing, and then they would force them down the ladder. Now, this was so that they knew who to get in touch with, so they could demand ransom, right? They could make these phone calls, and then they would have evidence that they had the children by the piece of clothing and the age and the name. Anyway, down the hatch, all of these 26 kids go. Horrible. Like I said, ages 5 to 14. The majority of them were 8, 9, and 10 years old. So they close up the trap door, the 3 men. They put a manhole cover over the trap door. Then they put a couple of batteries over that. Then they put a box on top of the batteries. Then they proceed to put dirt on top of everything. Now, the kids can hear the dirt being shoveled on top of them, and they are freaking out. Ed's trying to keep them calm. Ed's a little bit freaked out himself. You know, they're being buried alive in this sweltering heat. Now, as it turns out, they were actually only about 100 miles from the place they were kidnapped in Chowchilla, California. But the reason they drove around for so long, the 12 hours, is because they wanted to put them into this hole in the middle of the night. Because the place where this hole was this rock quarry that was owned by Fred Wood's dad. Now, Fred Woods at the time had his dad had given him a job there. Did I mention that when they were stealing cars, their parents got them off the hook? Yeah, they didn't serve any time. Parents got them out of it. And then Fred Wood's dad gave him a job at this quarry. So he had keys to this quarry. But they didn't want to go there while everybody was there. They wanted to go in the middle of the night. So they were just driving around in these vans till it became the middle of the night. Yeah, I know. Horrible. Just horrible. I can't even imagine what they were going through, these kids. So now they're in this hole. Now, what happens to these guys? They drive back to Fred's house. They take the 2 vans. They drive back to Fred's house. And they are attempting to call these phone numbers to make the ransom demands. They can't get through because by now, the 27 kids, they have not come home. They're usually dropped off by Ed like clockwork. None of these kids came home. Now they're all panicking. The chief of police, he's figured out that this is probably a kidnapping because, why would you take 26 kids, the bus and the bus driver? It must be a kidnapping. So he has a press conference, and now the FBI is getting involved. So FBI sends down 30 guys. They're going to help find these kids. What happens was that night they had a helicopter flying around, and the helicopter actually sees the bus. They find the bus that's hidden in this bamboo. That's kind of how they figured out it was a kidnapping. They also could see that there were the tire tracks from the two vans. So they figured out that they had put the kids into these vans, so they probably were going to keep them alive and make some demands. However, there's no cell phones in 1976. Nobody has cell phones. They have landlines. And if you guys, I don't know how old you guys are that are listening to this, most of you guys are my age. And you remember back in 1976, when you would try to get through and the line would be busy, or, you'd get that weird doo-doo-doo sound, It was horrible. So they couldn't get through. The lines were so busy. People were calling. They wanted to help. They wanted to find out about their loved ones. That there were police calling. There was reporters calling from all over the world. This thing made national news very, very quickly. So they couldn't get through. So they figured, okay, we're just going to take a little nap. So they go to sleep. They figure we'll try again when we wake up. They're all napping at Fred's house. Meanwhile, back at the bus. So the first thing Ed does is he enlists the help of this 14-year-old child named Michael. And he and Michael go around into the bus, and they're trying to assess, is there any other way to get out? What supplies do we have? They're kind of just taking inventory of the bus and trying to figure out. So they finally figure out the only way to get out of this bus is the way they came in, that trap door. There's no other way out. They're trying to keep the kids calm. They're trying to keep them, occupied. They go, hey, why don't you take a little nap? That kind of thing. So what the kids and Ed finally do is they take all the mattresses and they stack them up so that Ed and Michael can get on these mattresses and try to move. So they get the trap door. That's not a problem. Because what's starting to happen in the side of this truck is that the dirt was so heavy. The kidnappers did not anticipate this. The dirt was so heavy on top of the roof of this bus, the roof starts caving in. The sides of this bus are collapsing. So everything's coming in on these kids. So they figure out we're either going to die from suffocation or we're going to die trying to get out of here. Because they didn't know if the kidnappers were out there waiting for them. They didn't know if once they broke out, the kidnappers would be right there and shoot them. But, they said, who cares? We're going to die either way. So we might as well get out of here. So Michael and Ed, they're trying very, very hard to move this manhole. They finally move it enough, the manhole cover. They get the trap door out of the way. Now they're trying to move the manhole cover. And this is taking hours that they're, jimmying it and moving it and shoving it. And they finally get enough to where Michael can get his arm through and try to see what else is up there. And he can feel the batteries, but he doesn't really know what they are. But they're lightweight, so they keep working on this manhole cover. They finally move it out enough. Now Michael finds out there's a box up there. Now they got to get through this box. So he is pounding on the box and pounding on the box. Like I said, I'm going very quickly here, but it is taking hours and hours that he's doing this. Finally, the box starts to crack. Now, Ed is like, oh, okay. His kind of, at one point he had kind of given up, going, this is not going to work. So once Michael gets that box cracked, he's like, okay, it's going to work. So he renews his efforts and he starts helping with the box. They finally get it free. Sunlight comes in. Well, first the dirt's coming in on them. So now Michael has to dig. So he digs enough and the dirt's just kind of falling into the truck now. So he gets enough of the dirt out of the way that sunlight comes in. He gets some fresh air and he's able to escape. Michael is. He's able to, with the, he gets Ed out next. Then they start getting kids out. One by one, they get all the kids out. They are in the middle of nowhere. They look around. They don't know where they are. They're in the middle of nowhere. They see nothing. The kidnappers aren't there, thank God, but they don't know where they're at. And so they hear machinery in the distance. So they decide, we're going to walk towards the machinery. You know, the kidnappers might be there, they might not, but what else are we going to do? So they start walking towards the machinery. It turns out that's the quarry. So they walk to the quarry. They flag some construction workers down. They said, hey, we're from Chowchilla, California, because they didn't even know if they were still in California. They had driven for so long in the back of those vans, they thought we might not even be in California anymore. So they didn't know if they were still in California. We're from Chowchilla. So the construction workers, they had heard about this bus kidnapping. They're like, oh my God, these are the kids. So they call authorities. The authorities come out. They send out a prison bus to pick up these children and Ed. They take the kids in this prison bus to the prison, where they're put into a room and they're all questioned for 4 hours. And these kids, they're given like this oversized prison garb where they had to roll up the sleeves and roll up the pants. They give them something, they give them apples to eat and milk to drink. And they do notify the parents, that, hey, they've been found, but they want to question them. So, and none of them got a look at the kidnappers. They had pantyhose over their face. All they could tell you was what they went through in the back of the bus, in the back of the vans, in this truck underground. So after 4.5 hours, they put the kids on a Greyhound bus and send them back to Chowchilla. Those poor kids had to get back on buses. That must have been terrifying for them. Still don't have their parents. So when they get back to Chowchilla, they're greeted with, reporters and newscasters and videographers and their parents, thank God. Now, these kids suffered horribly after this. None of them were harmed terribly physically. They had cuts and bruises and some had some burns, but mentally they suffered horribly. Nightmares, anxiety disorders, depression. Some of them into adulthood started drinking and turned to drugs. It was very, very, very sad what happened with these kids. So what about the kidnappers? Well, the following morning, they wake up from their nap, they turn on the TV, and they find out the kids have escaped. They've all been rescued. They're like, what the hell? Well, there goes our plan. So Fred and James decide, they pack up and they leave town. They're like, oh, we're out of here. Richard's like, I'm just going to hold up here. They don't know who we are. They're not going to find me. So they knew that there had been 2 vans, because the kids had said there were 2 vans and 3 men. So the way that they figured out who it was this dig site was on quarry land, and the only way to get to it is if you had keys. And who had keys to this quarry? Fred Woods. So they decide they're going to go to Fred's house. And one of the security guards had said, hey, I had seen 3 men about a month ago. They were out here digging, and one of them was Fred. But, they don't mess with him because it's Fred. It's the owner's son. Who cares, right? So they go to Fred's house. They search Fred's house, and they actually find a piece of paper that's labeled plan right on the top of it. And it's the complete plans for the kidnapping. So they figure out, well, Fred's been hanging around with this Richard and James Schoenfeld, so these are probably the 3 guys. So now they're looking for Fred Woods, James Schoenfeld, and Richard Schoenfeld. Well, Richard Schoenfeld says he just turns himself in. He's like, yeah, here, I give up. It's me. They do catch James very quickly, but they catch James pretty quickly, but Fred Woods, he makes it all the way to Canada before he's apprehended, and they do apprehend him. So they bring him back. They bring back the 3 guys, and they're tried. They all pled guilty to 27 counts of kidnapping, but they refused to plead guilty to bodily harm, because if they pled guilty to the bodily harm, there would be an automatic sentence of life without the possibility of parole. They weren't having that. So now these kids had to go through a trial. And back then they didn't protect kids. These kids actually had to walk into a courtroom and face their accusers. How horrible for them. And then they had to describe what they went through, all 26 of them. So they were all convicted of this bodily harm. The cuts, the scrapes, the bruises, the mental, anguish that they were all going through. So they're convicted of the kidnappings and the great bodily harm. Well, they appealed. They said these kids did not suffer any harm. They all survived. Yes, we kidnapped them, but they're all fine. They're all home. They're doing fine. Well, they won their appeal. They said no, that they should not have been convicted. The appellate court said they should not have been convicted of bodily harm. See, back then, their mental illness was not a focus the way it is today. People, I don't know why, people just brushed off mental illness back then. Anxiety, yeah, so what? They'll get over it. Yeah, really, really, really. So these guys were never able to make their ransom demand. One of the things they found when they searched James's home was the letter, a draft of the ransom note for $5 million. So sad. So the appellate court overturned the conviction for bodily harm, and they changed their sentence to life with the possibility of parole. So every year or two, these kids would be faced with a parole hearing. They'd have to go to a parole hearing and tell the parole board what they went through. That's insane. Yeah. Those poor kids. So in 2012, Richard is paroled. In 2015, James is paroled. And in April of 2022, Fred is finally paroled. Now, the reason it took Fred so long to get paroled is because he couldn't behave in jail. He couldn't conform to the jail rules. He was caught with pornography. He was caught with a cell phone. He was running businesses out of the prison, which is not illegal. Apparently, I did not know it. You can run a business from the prison if you have a business, but you have to get permission first. He didn't get permission. He was running a Christmas tree farm and a used car lot from prison. Yeah, crazy. So he finally gets parole, and he is welcomed with his trust fund, his multi-million-dollar trust fund, and a big mansion that was, not far from the prison. So the families sued Fred Wood. They got some money, very little. Probably the attorneys got most of it. It's described that they got enough money to pay for therapy, but not enough for a house. Meanwhile, Fred has got multi-million dollars and lives in a mansion. The end, right? Ed, what happened to good old bus driver Ed? The hero of this story, one of the two heroes. Ed died at the age of 91. Yep. And Michael, he was one of the children, he was 14 at the time. He was one of these children that suffered horribly from anxiety, depression. He became an alcoholic, and but during his 20s, but he was able to turn his life around and is now sober. He lives his life sober, and he's still alive to tell the story. So sad. That's the show for today, guys. Except for the crime calendar. Let's get out the crime calendar. Aren't you glad that had a happy ending? Sort of happy. I mean, those kids probably still have nightmares to this day, right? Oh. One of the children actually became a minister, and he decided to forgive the kidnappers and actually met in person Richard and James and had them into his church and told them that he forgave them, and he's got pictures with them. Yeah, interesting, huh? So we're going to talk about the Unabomber auction. Wow. The FBI's investigation and pursuit of domestic terrorist Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was one of the costliest in history. It stretched beyond his 1995 arrest as the government sought to block him from repossessing the belongings they seized from his Montana property, which Kaczynski wished to donate to the University of University of Michigan. In 2011, an auction of these items raised $190,000. In addition to the $20,053 sale of Kaczynski's handwritten manifesto, the auction sold personal journals for $40,676, the sweatshirt and sunglasses from the iconic FBI sketch for $20,025, the typewriter Kaczynski used to type his manifesto for $22,003, and his autobiography for $17,780. All proceeds were put toward the $15 million restitution he had been ordered to pay his victims. Kaczynski's cabin was transferred to a museum in Washington, D.C., and put on display until the museum closed in 2019. How interesting. Okay. Guys, have a great weekend. I will be live at 11 a.m. on Sunday for my usual chit-chat about our crafts. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye.